Hey, welcome to my stream. This is Tiger and AJ. Good evening to you, AJ. Twitch is not giving me a live feedback from my stream. No, there is something great. Yeah, welcome to tonight's stream. We are going to Austria on the Semmeringbahn. You know, you remember one of the DLCs that were released last year, still for Train Sim World 4. This year, still before Train Sim World 5 was announced, celebrated one, and in my opinion, after I played it a lot during last week, it is actually worth celebrating it because it's a very good DLC. With extra care for the landscape, for the scenery, everything. In my opinion, still, obviously, like always, some niggers, but definitely one worth buying, what I did the other day. And now we are doing some Austrian operating rules again, and you might remember the video about setting up the brakes on a freight train in Germany, like P setting, G setting, and how you do that according to the mass or weight of the train and what vehicles are in the train and so on. And today I wanted to check out how this works in Austria. We will see there are a lot of similarities, but still some differences as well, and they actually can have an effect of how you are supposed to run your trains in the game. For that, we are running a freight train from this hard to pronounce city in Hungary, as far as I know, Hagias Halom, to Villach Süd. So Villach is another city in Austria, but in Kärnten, what is Carinthia, I think, in English, a different state in Austria. And we're starting from Wiener Neustadt and run all the route to Mürzzuschlag, from one state, from one Bundesland in Austria to the other, from Niederösterreich, Lower Austria, to Styria, the Steiermark, actually. And as you can see from what I have on DLCs, you can run the Talent 1, you can run the Vectron or the Taurus, the Eurosprinter locomotive, Siemens Eurosprinter locomotive that runs as a Baureihe 182 in Germany, or the Dispolog. That's this family of locomotives. You can see I have some blanks still to fill in this DLC, and I picked this one because it allows us to go all the way. Hagias Halom in Hungary to Villach in Carinthia in Austria. And we are running it, the part from Wiener Neustadt in Lower Austria to Mürzzuschlag in Styria, the Steiermark. So, here we are. Mürzzuschlag, you see they forgot the umlaut here. Here it is correct, Mürzzuschlag. We have a train that is about 1,350 tons, including the locomotives. We have 19 vehicles. 2 of them are Taurus locomotives, as you can see. Alright, AJ is taking care out. So, those are our nice ÖBB 1116 Siemens Eurosprinter Taurus locomotives. If you call them Taurus, it's only actually correct if they are ÖBB locomotives. For some reason they have the rights for using the Taurus name exclusively. And then what do we have? We have loaded Eanos cars with whatever coal or aggregate or whatever they have put in our cars here. And those cars, as most of the cars that we find here, have those brake selectors between G and P, goods timings or passenger timings. And this is what we are going to talk about today, whether it is correct that those cars are all set to P or whether we have to change the setting. And obviously the same thing comes with our locomotives here that have those brake selectors only in one cab, not in the other one. And you can already see that the brake selector is set to R, what is the fast and strong brake setting that we usually use on passenger trains. And at this point already we can see this is not the correct setting for our train. And what the correct setting is, I'm just wondering whether we will have the presentation in the beginning or whether we just start our train. Maybe we just start the train and come later with the presentation to see if we did it correctly. So again, we always need to know whether what mass or weight our train is, 1349, and then important, we have typically to subtract the weight of the working locomotives at the tip of the train from the gross weight of the train to determine what brake setting is correct. So typically we'll look for something like this, Dienstgewicht, what is the mass of the locomotive, the rated mass for the locomotive in service, and that is 88 tons, and we have two of them. So that is, if that works in my head, 176 tons for those two locomotives at the tip of the train. And if we subtract the 176, then we end up below 1,200 tons. And why this is important we will see in the presentation. But 1,200 tons, you might remember that from the video about the German rules for setting up those freight trains, is the line between being able to run your train with the locomotive set to G alone, or whether you have to use a long loco formation. So if your consist mass or weight is higher than the 1200 tons, then you actually have to set the first 5 vehicles in your consist also to G brake setting to accommodate for a long loco setup. Not so here, because we have to subtract the weight of the two locomotives from our gross weight here, and then we end up with a consist weight of below 1200. So this train here can be run with only the working locomotives at the tip set to G. So how does that work in our train here? Let's turn them on so that we can actually see our screens. And it's quite nice here, because here in those indicators we can already see what brake setting the locomotives are set to. Here you can't see it. This is the box for your locomotive that you're sitting in. This is because we have the traction lock on at the moment. This is the icon for the traction lock. But we can see that the system recognizes the second locomotive in a multiple unit, Teilnehmer 2. So, well, constituents of this multiple unit, unit 2, and the second one is indicating that the brakes are applied. This is this icon with the arrows and this ring, and in the middle you can see that they are set to R. This is not the way that we can use it, because shortly below the 1200 we have to set our leading locomotives to G, least effective setting, slow and not so strong. And we have to do this with the second locomotive by hand, meaning we have to actually walk over and enter this locomotive. If you don't want to use the shortcuts for moving between the cabs, obviously. And then you have to set this selector also to G. And then we can step out again. Whereas the cars, we can leave them as they are. We don't need to set the first 5 to G also. Anything else that we have to do on our panel? Lights. That is important, and the safety systems are on this panel here in the connecting corridor between the cabs. We have the CIFA and we have the LZB. I don't need it here, but nevertheless we turn it on anyway, and the PZB. Nice. So, what else is there to be set up? That was that panel. Yeah, we're running with PZB mode M, most probably. It makes sense. I don't want to go into this any deeper today. You can see that on this screen now. We can see that the second locomotive has been set to G. The brakes are still applied. And now that we have the RFB on the cruise control, we can set it to like 25, because we will be starting here in the shunting part of the yard. So we will be a shunting service until we pass the first main signal, and shunting services are typically limited to 25. You can also see that we have to pass this W sign, the waiting signal, for what we need the consent of the Weichenwärter, and he allowed us to proceed beyond this signal, but this typically tells us that we are a shunting service. Releasing the brakes, the AFB holding brake will hold us in place. You can see in the brake cylinders there are still 4 bars in both bogies, so the train won't roll away. You can see that the brakes are still applied. Both locos are set to G, both brakes are still applied. Brake pipe is filled. Great, nice to have you back, AJ. Is filled to its regular pressure of 5 bars. The main reservoir, HBL, Hauptbehälterleitung, is at 9.4, something that rocks. That is good. And I have read, at least in the German Brivo, in the directive that tells you how to brake a train, that with every time you start a freight train, you should use the Angleicher. And then we will try doing this. We can't actually see a signal. The only signal that we, no main signal at least, with a green light and something, we can only see this one. This allows only shunting services to pass. So, good thing that we set the speed to no faster than 25. We will start as a shunting service. Don't forget to turn on the exterior light. At normal is just okay. Train lights we don't need. We don't have any passengers. We don't need any doors. Wipers we don't need at the moment. I think we can start this train. Just check if our lights are on. They are. Check at the end of the train if we have an end sign. Oh, unfortunately we do not have one. Unfortunately. We can't turn one on. Sending us out without a Zugschluss again. That is not so great. Sometimes you were able to click on somewhere and then turn those signs on manually. But not so, at least I don't find the spot for it. Well, we have to do with this. Typically, in real life, you would not start your train without a Zugschluss, I guess. But in the game, what are we supposed to do? Okay, we already called the signaler. Signaler is still happy with us leaving the yard, so we will try doing this. Applying a bit of throttle. You can see it actually works. And the brake released. AFB holding brakes released. And as soon as the brakes are released, we can apply more power to get this train on the run. You can see on this double header formation, front loco is using the front panto, rear loco is using the rear panto. This E signal sign here is something that we can talk about in a different stream. It is not prototypical that it flashes like this. This is a bit sad that it is flashing like that. So, this signal allows passing it as a shunting service. And we will stay below 25 as long as we are a shunting service. If I remember correctly, the clear path announcement also works in Austria and can increase the speed to 25, but we did not get any, so we will just stick with the 25. More nice trains, car trains, tanker trains, empty Rose cars, Habine car, no, don't know what they are, at least closed cargo cars. And we're running into the setting sun. We actually have to stop in Neuenkirch in Niederösterreich. This NÖ umlaut indicates that this Neuenkirch is the one in Lower Austria, confirming that we're actually starting our service in Lower Austria. See if you see any difference in, well, the graphics. I turned on the motion blur that I typically had turned off, since I did not like the representation of the wheels in Sampatch Grade in Train Sim World 2. Now I turned it on again. So, I did not look this up, but I guess the rules are, if they use the same rules as in Germany, then we are turning at this starter signal that shows us 40 max from a shunting service into a train service. We can go now the 40 that the signal indicated when passing the signal with the tip of our train. Limit will be valid until the whole train has passed the last switch in our path. As you can see, we're coming out of this freight yard. Probably going across this crossover to be on the right track. And there is the shunting limit sign. And here, to stress this once more, here it is correct to write Verschubfahrten on this sign. You know this niggle that I have about the newer German routes where they typically put this sign up, even though in Germany it should say Halt für Rangierfahrten instead of Halt für Verschubfahrten. HSS looks beautiful though. The sign or the whole thing? I think the whole thing. Next to us, the same locomotive pulling the passenger cars. I hope the Roadrunner is working. Yeah, that was the Roadrunner. And now we can accelerate to line speed. Unfortunately, still in timetable mode, all the freight trains are limited to 100, regardless of whether they are PZB-M or PZB-U trains. You know that PZB-U would limit you to 100 maximum, PZB-M limits you to 120, and then it depends on the gradient and actually the mass of your train, how fast you can go in a specific section of track. Here between Wiener Neustadt and Neuenkirch, we should actually be able to go the 120, but we are not allowed to. We've had this video about the legal speed limits, and there it clearly says this, that freight trains, or as they are called in Austria, the NP, the non-passenger trains, can go 120 if there is no lower limit. Nevertheless, when you are German routes and Austrian routes tend to limit freight services to 100. What is now an instance of the pendulum going too far into the opposite direction, because before this change you had freight trains, AI freight trains running around with 160. Well, was not good because freight trains are limited to 120 in Germany and in Austria. And now they overdid it a bit and limited them to 100. So the route is more or less 2 parts, or 3 parts if you want. It's the flat part. From Wiener Neustadt before you actually get to the incline, and then the part up to Semmering, and then the part down to Mürzzuschlag. Another freight train from the opposite direction with the same cars that we are pulling about. This is what it looks like with motion blur on. I've not entirely decided whether I like it better or not, but I leave it on for now. St. Egyden, I think this is. The beautiful Taurus. I wonder why we are required to stop at Neuenkirch. Probably just to wait for a signal to clear. Those autumn trees sometimes look like a red signal all of a sudden appearing on the line. The signals are super clear. Here is a dead section. We have to open the main circuit breaker. You can see that works for the second locomotive as well. Loco is telling us that the main circuit breaker is open. Move the throttle to now it counts. We should lose the line voltage. And now we are through. We can close the main circuit breaker again and apply some power. Don't necessarily need to though, we can see it on the horizon. There is a signal coming up that requires us to slow down to 100 and to 100 to 65. Since we are PZBM, and then, if I'm not mistaken, to 45 before we hit the 500 Hertz, if there is one. You know, on some lines in Austria we have the 500 Hertz magnets, on other lines we have not. But with running 30, we are at any rate safe. Most probably we have to stop in front of the red signal anyway.
Türfreigabe. Türfreigabe. Türfreigabe.
And AJ says to me it looks like a blurry mess until you're essentially past it now. This might be a thing on the stream. Yeah. And then it is often a thing that depends on the lighting, like this now we are driving into the setting sun. Then it is especially difficult to read the signals properly. Yeah, AJ was referring to the signals only. The thing is, if you know what to expect exactly, you can decipher this blurry mess much better. And the newer DLCs have a better visibility in the signals now. Colors come out better, and the light that the signals are emitting is better visible. Well, I think at least. So I guess we cannot dodge this red signal by just approaching it slowly, because the game wants us to stop at Neuenkirch. Here it is. Here there might actually be a 500 Hertz magnet. We will see in a sec. Bing, and here it is. See? Limiting us to 35 now, so we have to drive 30 and not faster. So it is good that we are at about 20. In Austria, always careful when you're approaching a red signal with those Signalnachahmer, like this one, announcing that you are approaching a red one. Sometimes they are secured with another 1000 Hertz magnet, and they should actually be yellow then, but they are not. Most of the time they are not. So, game wants us to stop here at the platform, not go all the way to the red signal. Don't know if there is any advantage of doing that. Okay, we have to wait until 16:03. And it is already much later. So we actually have to wait until the next day now. This is because we waited so long before starting the train. No, we don't have to wait until the next day. We can go on. And with jedem anfahren. Angleicher. Wait a bit for the brakes to release. And then throttle to something like 20, so that the AFB holding brake releases. And then we can apply a bit more. Don't forget, we are still in the restricted 500 Hertz. That means we are limited to 20. Now the monitoring stopped. And we can go back to line speed. What is 100 for us? As discussed previously. This SG indicator, the black on yellow one, is your wheel slip indicator. This one here. And now we don't have to stop anymore, we can just go all the way to Mürzzuschlag. I actually tried to find out what this somehow weird name Mürzzuschlag actually means, and as it is the case sometimes with words like this, it is not really clear. Some people claim that this is because The river that lives there, the Mürz, makes a bend towards the city. And some claim that this is from a Slavic word. At any rate, even for a German speaker, Mürzzuschlag sounds weird. But I have learned that this little city is actually quite famous for composer Johannes Brahms writing one of his symphonies there, and Elfriede Jelinek, one of the greatest Austrian writers, was born there. The city in Hungary, where our train started, on the other hand, is... What jumped to my eye when I looked it up on the internet is that it has a coat of arms that sports an ostrich with a horseshoe in its beak. What is quite rare, at least to my knowledge about heraldic things. So, even though using the IFB we managed to speed here, and get docked for it. So carefully with it when running downhill at any rate. But even when running here in this more or less even country, don't overdo it. By the way, you might have noticed that the captions here on the boards are not only in German, but in a second language, and I think it is Hungarian. I don't understand a word of it, but it looks to me like Hungarian. And since our train is coming from Hungary, it makes sense somehow. Here are the mountains that we have to climb. And before we get to the mountains, I think we should have the presentation. Still a bit, but soon enough. Before we pass this. No, it doesn't say here. What's it called? Gloggnitz and Schlögelmühl is only given here. Well, let's just wait until we get to the limit, the speed limit, and it is slowing us down to 80 when we're approaching the mountains. Main signal high green. Distance signal announcing high green. All good. Signalnachahmer announcing still high green. Does it now say no? But soon enough we are running into the 80 limit. Probably should get an announcement for it. Or maybe not. Now here, this looks like the announcement for it. Announcement for 80.
Zugbeeinflussung.
Luckily we don't need to acknowledge it. It is not 70 or lower. Here it is. No. Here it is. The limit to 80. And soon it will be limited to 70 at the end of the spend, I guess. So no harm in slowing down even more a bit. This drop to 70 is not announced because it is only a drop of 10 kilometers. And in Austria, drops in line speed are only announced if they are at least 20 kilometers per hour and a certain percentage of the speed before. So here is the 70. It was not announced. And now we're climbing the hill. When actually slowing down the AFB here is a bit awkward in my opinion, because if you just set the speed to a lower speed, then you will end up with a speed that is significantly below the target speed, because it does not stop slowing down until you are below the target speed. So it seems to make sense to slow down below the speed before setting the AFB. So if I remember correctly, the limit will increase again after the 70 section is over to 80, before it then will decrease gradually to 70-60, then it will raise again or increase again to 70 and then drop to 60-50 before we get to the summit. I will try to do this out of my head more or less. So we will see where we are getting here. Here the limit increases to 80 again. Trying to use the Roadrunner for that. I don't know about you and how it looks on the stream, but I like this scenery here with the setting sun. So we can increase to 80 and pull up our train into the mountain with our double-headed train here.
Sifa.
Yes, Sifa. And I think this is a good point to get in the presentation. AJ, you still awake? So, presentation for today. I am, she says. Brake modes and brake settings. What we talked in the beginning, do we set our vehicles, our locomotives, our cars to G, P or R or something else? Before we can discuss this, I want to recap a bit the stuff that we have already seen in the German operating rules and what we learned there. And before we can know which brake setting we actually want in what situation, we want to quickly go through what brake settings are there, by the way, and how do they differ from each other. We know, most of us at least, that there are settings for G and P, what is Güter, goods, and Personen, people or passenger. And on passenger trains, typically not on freight trains, there is also R for rapid, what is rapid in German. And it's the same word as rapid in English, obviously. And the G and P brakes differ in timing. G brakes apply slow, P brakes apply fast. Why is that so? Because goods trains, freight trains are typically much heavier, and so there is more energy in a rolling freight train that needs to be pulled out of it, and with slow applying brakes we don't burn them or melt them, and we don't have so much problems in parts of the train braking faster than the other part of the train. So with goods timings, just like in Great Britain as well, they are slower than passenger timings. Is the rapid timing R faster than P? It's a common misconception, sometimes at least. No, they apply just the same in the same time. So R brakes don't apply faster than P brakes. We will see what the difference is, but P and R brakes apply within the same time frame. What they differ is the maximum pressure that can be applied into the brake cylinder, and therefore the maximum brake force that the brakes can execute on the wheels. So G brakes obviously have a relatively low pressure in the cylinders, whereas P brakes also have a relatively low pressure, maximum pressure in the cylinders. So there is no difference between G and P brakes. They all inflate the brake cylinders to the same maximum pressure. The G brakes slow, the P brakes fast, but up to the same maximum pressure. Whereas the rapid brakes, the R brakes, at a certain speed at any rate, they inflate the brake cylinder to a higher pressure. Not all the time, typically about a speed of 70 or something like this. If you start applying your brakes, then the R brakes apply a higher maximum pressure for higher speeds to slow down the train, and this is then a more effective brake. Then we have seen that there is something like P2, what is something in between. It applies just with the same timing as P and R brakes, but it goes up to a maximum pressure that is between the maximum pressure with P brakes and R brakes. And this is a brake setting that only is featured on some locomotives. I don't think that in the game there is one locomotive that has this setting, but on some German locomotives you have this intermediate brake setting. Then this is GP, P2 and R, always talking about the air brakes, obviously, the automatic brakes, train brakes, all the brakes that are controlled typically with the brake pipe that runs through the train, sometimes with electric impulses, but with applying air into a brake cylinder. And then there can be additional brakes that can slow down the train faster, especially in emergency situations like the magnetic track brake. This thing, a shoe that is pressed onto the rail so that not only the friction between the wheel and the rail slow down the train, but also the friction between this shoe and the rail, and this shoe will be magnetized so that it has even more traction with the rail and slows down the train faster. Most of the passenger cars that can run faster than 140 in Germany and in Austria have those magnetic track brakes to be used in an emergency brake application and Schnellbremsung, and on some trains even if the driver seems it necessary. And this can be also combined with the rapid brakes, and then you have the brake setting R plus MG magnetic track brake. Then there is this thing with the WB. You might remember me talking about that, the first version that was released of the ICE T 411 had on its screen indications for a WB brake, whereas it was rated on the brake markings with an MG magnetic track brake. That was fixed in the meantime. The thing is that the ICE 3, the 403 and the 406, they have this eddy current brake, Wirbelstrombremse, that can be combined with the R brake. It is a quite fancy brake, but from my knowledge, it is only the ICE 3 train that has this, and the track needs to be fitted for it to work. And it also started as an emergency brake, and later it was supposed to be used as a service brake. I don't know if it actually came to that, but this is a thing that there is in Germany. And then we were all talking about Bremsstellungen, brake settings here, typically with a lever on your car or on your locomotive or a switch where you can set those settings for your brakes. And as opposed to brake settings, there are in Germany at least brake modes, Bremsarten, that are specified in the timetable what brake mode the train is supposed to use. The general rule for your brake setting is that you take the most effective setting unless there is any reason to take a different one. And in the timetable in Germany, you can be required to run your train in G. Then there is not much to do, then set your brakes to G. Or typically you will get this in your timetable, PR. That means you can choose according to your operating rules between P, G, P2, R, R plus MG, and there are sometimes those specific rules for heavy freight trains where you have to slow down the braking of the front part of the train so that the forces in the train are not too high and you don't derail your train. And if you are actually allowed to use your eddy current brake, then you will have this as a Bremsart. In Austria, the terms Bremsarten and Bremsstellungen are not used in this way as they are in Germany. From what I've seen, they sometimes use them a bit like synonyms, and it is not quite clear. They have two Bremsarten, what is historically the thing, G and P, but then they also talk about Bremsstellungen, G and P, and all those other things are Bremsstellungen only and not Bremsarten. What I have not seen happening in Austria also is that they don't specify a specific brake mode in the timetable. And they also don't have and don't use, from what I've seen, the eddy current brake. Correct me if that is wrong, but I have not come across anything that is using an eddy current brake in Austria, and this brake mode of WB was not mentioned anywhere. And P2 I have not seen mentioned either in Austrian rules, but the rest we will encounter in Austria, just as we encountered it in Germany from what I've seen. And the things about timing and maximum pressure and the adding of magnetic track brakes, this is, from what I have understood reading the rules, more or less all stuff that we encounter in Austria as well. Alright, that was recapping what brake settings we have and what difference the different settings actually do. And then we have looked, still in Germany, you can see that, the design, how to set up our train. According to timetable, so this is talking Germany, if you have a timetable in G, then you will end up with all the brakes in your train in G, that is easy. Or if the timetable gives you PR, then you have more possible brake settings. So in G, obviously the only possible brake setting is G, and in the PR Bremsart you have a wide variety of different settings that you can choose from depending on what train you have and how long and heavy and whatever. So G, P, P2, R, R plus MG. P plus MG I did not put up here, but it also exists. The R plus WB, as we have seen, is its own Bremsart, does not apply to the PR, and for freight trains not at any rate. If you go back, this is again recapping the video, don't break it unless it is fixed. Typically you have your locomotive or more of them, then the first 5 cars in the consist can make a difference, then the remaining cars in the consists, and here for G it is the whole train, and then it depends on the consist weight or consist mass. Sometimes the consist mass will be more accurate in a physical way, I think, but they typically talk about the Gewicht, the weight in the rules. So on G, not much to choose, every brake needs to be set to G. With the PR specified, you can obviously choose, and then it depends on how heavy your consist is. Consist is more or less the train without the working locomotives. So cars or dead locomotives that are in the train and being towed. If this is up to 800 tons, and now you remember what we did in the beginning, we subtracted the mass of the locomotive from the gross weight that was indicated to us by the game. Then we can set our locomotive to P, the first 5 cars to P, and the remaining cars in consist to P in a freight train. Here, in this video we talked only about freight trains, not passenger trains. For German trains, so up to 800 tons consist weight or consist mass, we can have the faster setting of P on the locomotive in all the cars. Up to 1200 tons, and that was the margin that was relevant for us in the game at the beginning, we have to set the locomotive or the leading locomotives, if they are working, to G, and the rest can run in P. Again, Germany, talking Germany, but we will see it is quite the same in Austria. And then again, Germany up to 1600 tons, we not only have to set our locomotive to G, but also the first 5 cars in the consist behind the locomotive. So if we have 2 locomotives like in our train here, we have to set both locomotives to G and then 5 more cars. So the second locomotive does not count in this total of 5 cars in the consist. That is, and then the rest can be run in P. That is what is always called nicely the LL, long loco or large loco formation, and what we can actually do in the game, what is never done for you on the game alone. So you actually have to use your external camera or walk there and move all those brake levers from P to G on the first 5 cars. Remember, if there are multi-units like with the car transport cars or the intermodal cars that are consisting of 2 vehicles actually, then you always have to make sure that you set both switches on those units to the same brake setting. Otherwise you can run into problems. Beyond the 1600 tons in Germany, again, don't forget we're talking and recapping Germany, we typically have to set everything to G unless we have a special setup. We have a weight of every car of at least 32 tons and no bad multiple units. The bad multiple units are those articulated cars, Gelenkwagen and short-coupled cars with single axles, kurzgekoppelte Wägen with Einzelradsätzen. Maybe those car transport units and the S cars for the intermodal trains. Not entirely sure after thinking about it whether this is applying to that here. Anyway, at least this is the rule. We need to have a minimum weight on every car so that we don't have light cars. Why is that? Because light cars are pushed out of the train easily if the end of the train is running into the front of the train. And why is that a problem? Typically with the brake pipe that runs through the whole train. The locomotive, the driver, sets with the brake valve a certain pressure for the brake pipe, and the lowered pressure results in the brake cylinders being filled. And this starts at the locomotive and then propagates through the whole train. Think back of the video about the single pipe air brakes on Sandpatch Grade that we had like a year ago or something. And this obviously takes time to propagate through the whole train. So the front of the train, the first cars will always start braking before the rest of the train will start. And if the end of the train runs into the front of the train, then you will have a lot of pressure in the middle of the train. Like think back of the video about the couplers that we did, especially on curves and bends with our side buffers. We will have compressing forces in the train if the end of the train brakes later than the front of the train and the end runs into the front of the train. And those compressing forces tend to kick out the cars in the middle if they are especially lighter than the rest. So we need to have a requirement that we don't have any light cars in our consist if we want to run trains heavier than 1600 tons in the long loco formation. Spectre, good evening to you. Super nice to see you on the chat. I hope you are not too bored about my treatment of the Austrian operating rules today. Yes, and if this requirement is not met, it can still be that we have UICAK couplers. Those are those automatic couplers that some of the heavy ore trains in Germany have. We have talked about this in the couple of videos as well. And why is that not a problem then? Because those couplers, they don't use the side buffers, but they are buffered in the middle. They have central buffers, and on center buffers we typically do not have this problem with the middle light cars being pushed out of the train. And this is why we can run the long loco formation on trains like this, even if there are light cars or those bad multiple units that are mentioned there. So if those requirements are not met, we have to run the whole train in G if it is beyond 1600 tons in Germany. Keep that in mind, because we will need this information when we go to the Austrian. Sorry for being late, Spectre, no problem at all. I'm so happy that you joined. Yeah, and beyond the 2,500 tons up to 4,000 tons, more or less, it's the same thing, but here the trains, the cars actually have a higher minimum weight requirement, because now the forces are obviously higher because the cars are heavier, or that are pushing from the end. So the cars need to have a higher minimum weight to be sure that they don't get pushed out of the train in the middle. If this is not met, we have to run it in G. So just recapitulating again, here are the mentionings in the directive where you can read up the requirements. And yeah, up to 1600 tons long loco, up to 1200 tons working locomotives at the tip into G, and up to 800 tons we can everything run in P. And beyond that we have specific requirements. If we don't have center buffers, then we need to have a certain homogeneity in our train. We don't need, we can't have cars that are easily pushed out. This is an idea that we come back in a different version in Austria again. Yeah, that was Germany, and now let's get to Austria actually. So, from what I've seen in the rules, you can see them mentioned here on the left. This is the Betriebsvorschrift V3, the Central Operating Rules document. I updated it. It is from June 2024. The sections 25 and 27 are actually relevant here, and then there is a Dienstanweisung 30.0420 that tells you, especially in its appendix 2, how to calculate the consist weight or consist mass. So let's look at the train again. Obviously we have a locomotive at the top or more locomotives. Again, all working locomotives at the tip fall into this category. They always have the same brake setting, or typically they have the same brake setting, and they are treated more or less as a unit at the beginning of the train. So double-headed trains, if you set the first one to G, you also have to set the second one to G, just like in our example as we started our train here. Then the first 5 vehicles in consist, same thing as in Germany, preparing for the long loco formation obviously. And again, multiple unit cars, Wageneinheiten, like the car transport cars or the intermodal transport cars, count separately. So you count every vehicle as one, but they must be set to the same brake setting. That is more or less the same that we have in Germany. In Germany, we have some special requirements for how some of those units don't count separately if they only have one wheel set, for example. And also for this total of the 5 vehicles, according to the rules, they are actually mentioned there, Zwischentriebfahrzeuge, that are working mid-train locomotives. So it's a working locomotive that is applying power to the train, but it is running in the middle of the train for some reason, right? Sometimes on the big American trains you see that with locomotives at the beginning, at the end, and sometimes in the middle. If it happens that a train has a locomotive that is working in the first 5 vehicles, then it is also counted to this 5 vehicles in the consist, even if it is a working locomotive. Why do we need this? Because working locomotives typically do not count to the consist weight. Then we have the remaining vehicles in consist, and we have additional locomotives at the end maybe, or maybe within as mid-train locomotives, Zwischentriebfahrzeuge within the remaining vehicles in the consist. Alright, and now let's see what brake settings we have to apply. For Austria, I will put it into one table together with the passenger trains. Passenger trains are in Austrian rules often referred to as P-Zug, a P train for passenger, versus an NP train, a non-passenger train. This is, we have seen this in the video about the legal speed limits, that as soon as there is one freight car or special vehicle car in the train, then it is no longer a passenger train and counts as a freight train. But it is still a train that can transport passengers, but it is not a P-Zug anymore. So those are passenger-only trains, and what we would probably remember as freight are not passenger-only trains, typically freight trains then, or passenger trains that have freight cars in it. This is the distinction here. And then we have the consist mass or consist weight, and this is the weight of all the vehicles in the train with the working locos subtracted. Those are the working locos at the tip and any working locos mid-train or at the end. So you subtract the weight of all working locos and then you end up with the Wagenzuggewicht or Wagenzugmasse. They sometimes use the one word or the other in the rules. Wagenzugmasse, mass would be correct probably, but sometimes they also say Wagenzuggewicht, Wagenzug weight. And then this is because it is stated specifically that locos at the tip of the train are also not counted. Will probably not encounter this in the game a lot, but even though dead locos are typically counted as cars, coaches in the train and add to the consist mass, if they are towed at the tip of the train for whatever reason, they don't count to this consist mass. So what do we do in the game? We typically look at our pause screen, take the number and subtract the weight of the locos at the tip of your train. If you have two, like in our example, then you have to double it and subtract it. What was nice because we ended up underneath the 1200 ton mark, and you typically find it written on the side of the locomotive like Dienstgewicht, and then you have typically on those modern locomotives a weight of something between 80 and 90 tons per locomotive, and you subtract it and then you end up with the relevant consist mass for your brake setting. For passenger trains, the consist mass does not really make any difference, because on passenger only trains the rules say in section 27 you always have to set every vehicle to the most effective brake setting, and this typically results in R setting for the locomotives and in R plus mg settings on the passenger cars. Since there are no cars that I know that are R plus WB, Wirbelstrombremse, typically R plus mg should be the most effective setting that you can set your passenger cars to. So passenger trains is relatively easy. Typically you don't have to do anything. Sometimes you might end up with a formation where the locomotive is not set to R, but typically it should be set to R. But if you have passenger formations with a locomotive that is running freight services as well, then sometimes it might be set to P or whatever. So check it, R setting for passenger trains. And on some of the cars you can change the setting, but typically you don't have to, only if there are some problems with the brake. With freight trains it is more interesting, and now we are getting back to those limits and that we have already seen on the German chart. Up to 800 tons, same thing as in Germany, we can set the locomotive to P, or the locomotives and all additional locomotives also to P. And our cars we have to set to the most effective rating, but not R. Typically the freight cars don't have R anyway, but if you have a mixed train like passenger cars and freight cars, we can't set our passenger cars to R. And this, in most cases, I think will end up you setting your freight cars and all the other cars obviously to P. And you end up with an all P train like in Germany. Up to 800 tons consist mass, everything can be set to P. Up to 1200 tons, same limit as we had in Germany. We have to set the leading locomotives, the working locomotives at the tip of the train, to G. Not only the first one, also if you have a double-headed train like ours, to G. Both of them. If we cannot set our brake to G for any reason, then we have to switch it off. Even if this leaves us with no brakes on the locomotive. But this is what the rules say. Again, why do we do that? We don't want our locomotive brake harder than the rest of the train and our train run into the back of our locomotive. This is why we set our locomotive to a slower brake setting, so that this somehow counteracts the effect that the locomotive starts applying the brakes earlier than the rest of the train. If it has a slower setting, then this will counteract this effect a bit and the train will not run into a fast braking locomotive. And if we can't do that, and we can turn off the brake, and then obviously we don't have the problem at all, because then the locomotive cannot start braking earlier than the rest of the train. This is a thing that is also specified in Germany as well. If we cannot set the brake to G, then we can turn it off, or have to turn it off. We can't, this is a thing. Rather turn it off than have it on too fast. The rest of the train will just run like the train up to 800 tons in the most effective but not R, what will result typically in P setting. So this is almost identical with the German setup, up to 1200 tons locomotives at the front to G, rest can be in P. This is quite easily done in the game. But just be wary, like with the service that we started here on our stream, the locomotives were set to R by default. And that is obviously a thing that does not work in a freight train at all. So we had to set it to G, both of them, by using the brake selector. That is on the rear wall of your cab in the game. What is, as far as I know, not prototypical. When I was on a, what was it, a 185.2, I think, a Trax 2 Bombardier locomotive. They have this thing in the engine room, and it is more or less a yellow lever that you can move between G and P. Quite a big one on this thing that controls the brakes, and as soon as you move it, you hear the brakes hissing and doing stuff. And it's not like this little switch that we have in the game, but in the game we have it on the rear of our cab, and we can set it from R to G. So again, this is what we have in Germany. And then beyond the 1200 tons, it starts again with the same thing that we have in Germany now comes in the long loco formation. Set the locos to G and the first 5 vehicles to G. As a rule, we have to have at least one of those 5 vehicles with a working G brake. So we cannot switch all the brakes off in the first 5 vehicles and the locos. There must be at least one vehicle with a working G brake. There are exceptions to it, but typically you must have at least one that is left, and this is then the long loco, large loco formation, because the rest will be run in P with the most effective but not R, and for the locomotives it is P given in the rules. So how is this different to Germany? Because we don't have this hard limit to up to 1600 tons and up to 2500 tons, where we can only do the long loco formation if we have this minimum requirements on our car weights on or alternatively center buffers with the automatic couplings. At least the rules, from what I have seen in Austria, don't forbid to run a train in long loco formation even if it exceeds the 1600 tons and does not have those minimum requirements on car weights that we want to have in Germany. And there are still some optional differences here. So just imagine you're running a train from Germany to Austria. In Germany, you have a train that is heavier than 1600 tons consist mass, like running a train of 2000 tons, for example, and you have some empty cars in your train so that the requirements are not met. So you are unfortunately required to run your whole train in G according to German rules. And then you go to Austria. What do you do then? Do you stop your train and go along your 50 cars at the rear and switch them from P to G? This is from G to P, because in Germany you had to run them into G. You cannot jump out, right? You have to stop or whatever. This is clumsy at any rate, because in Austria you can switch the remaining cars after the first 5 vehicles to P. Don't need to run them in G, because this limit beyond 1600 does not apply according to Austrian rules, from what I've said. So this is probably the reason, at least this is what I imagine, that the rules specify for a couple of years now that you can optionally run the rest of the train, the vehicles past the first 5 and additional locomotive in G, or turn them off if G is not possible, if you are running a cross-border train, grenzüberschreitender Verkehr, and your consist mass is bigger than the 1600 tons. So this is the same limit that we have from the German rules, where it can be a problem if you are beyond the 1600 tons and have empty cars in your trains, for example. And there can be a difference. In Germany, you need to run it fully in G. In Austria, you are required to run the rest of the train and the additional vehicles in P. And this is maybe, tell me in the comments if I'm wrong here, this is maybe at least one of the reasons why it is allowed in Austria to run the whole train in G if it is a cross-border traffic and you are beyond the 1600 tons. But then your whole train needs to be switched to G or off. You cannot have any vehicles with P in your train anymore. Another interesting optional thing in Austrian rules is that you can actually opt out of the long loco formation and treat your train as if it was below the 1200 tons. So set also the first 5 vehicles to the most effective but not R, so what is typically P, in a certain situation. And this is a situation that you can actually encounter in the game a lot. If you have einheitliches Wagenmaterial. What does that mean? You have all cars that are either empty or all cars are loaded. So you don't have a mix of loaded and empty cars in your train, but all cars are empty, all cars are loaded. And all your cars have bogies, and they are of the same type, more or less. They are starting with the same letter, like Z cars or E cars or L cars or whatever. And Spectre says the Austrian rules seem to value personal freedom and decision more than German rules. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how this can work in Austria, that you can run really heavy trains in brake setting that you would not be able or not be allowed to use in Germany. What I've not actually been able to find is if there is a maximum in Austrian rules. In Germany we have the 4000 tons. Beyond the 4000 tons consist mass we cannot run the train, and there must be some sort of a maximum for Austrian trains anywhere. I have not found that so far. But at least it can be more than 1600 tons, otherwise this rule would not make any sense. Yeah, and in the game, obviously, you get a lot of those really homogenic trains. It is a train with 20 cars that are totally identical, 10 cars loaded, all with the same weight, all with the same mass, all with the same settings. And those trains, even if you are beyond the 1200 tons with your consist mass, you can run in Austria with a setting where you only set the locomotives to G and the rest to P. Then you don't have to go along with your external camera and switch those settings around, but you can leave the cars to P as they are typically spawned in. So that is an interesting rule that I have not seen in Germany, and no equivalent. It is a bit the same idea like with the rule that if you don't have any car that is lighter than 32 tons or 40 tons and can still run the long loco formation on those heavy trains. So it is tagging to the homogeneity of the train, and then it is possible, because then you don't have those peak forces in your train when heavy cars run into lightweight cars, right? At least this is how I understand all this. So you have beyond the 1200 tons actually differences between German rules and Austrian rules, and you can run trains in long loco or with only set to G in Austria that you cannot run like this in Germany. If this is made up by stricter regulations for top speed, then maybe we find it out when we talk about the Bremshundertstel and how they are treated in Austria next week or some other week. Maybe this is more or less the the thing that makes it possible to have those brake settings on the trains. Yeah. So this option, I guess, is to make it easier to have cross-border traffic with Germany and other countries that might require trains beyond the 1200 tons to run in G, or be beyond the 1600 tons more or less. Yeah, and Spectre says it's a bit counterintuitive if you look at the gradients in Austria, is it not? Yeah, this is why I actually have the suspicion, but this is just a hunch at the moment, that we have a higher or more restrictive speed limits for those trains in Austria in gradients. So if the train does not actually get to really high speeds, then we can probably work with more effective brakes without risking those peak forces within the train. But this is something that we still have to look at, and why it is like this. At the moment I can't just tell you what I have found in the rules and what they tell to me. But it is interesting, no? Probably they just limit the trains to much lower speeds, and then we don't need to deal with those peak forces as they are doing it in Germany. And maybe the limit is just lower. Like if we cannot have trains that are heavier than 2,500 tons, then we don't need the rules for trains up to 4,000 tons. And this is another hunch, that in gradients you just don't have 4,000 ton trains. Americans and Canadians will laugh about us because they run trains of completely different dimensions over gradients of completely different dimensions. But again, this is a different story. Then you have like 6, 7, 8 locomotives in the trains, and not trains that are just pulled by 2 locomotives that we have here that are rather short. Okay, I think this is for today. The presentation, a lot to think about and have it ponder about it. But for the game, to play the game, I think this is important to think of this thing with the einheitliches Wagenmaterial. Then you don't need to feel bad if you have a train that is like 1400 tons and you are too lazy to set it to long loco and just switch your locomotive to G, or leave it there if it is already there by default. And what we have seen in the beginning of the video is a train that has like, what did we have, 1,349 tons, and you think, oh, it's beyond the 1,200 tons, I have to put out the long loco. No, if you subtract the weight of the 2 locomotives at the beginning, twice 88 tons, 176 in total, and you end up below the 1,200 tons, and then you are righteously running the train with only the locomotives turned to G. But turn them to G because they spawn in R, what is obviously a bit of a trap. End of presentation for today. And we can run our train up Semmering. And even uphill we have problems with not overshooting the speed limit with the AFB. Might be a thing with the 2 locomotives. Yeah, but it did not spoil the scoring. So, I think at the end of this station here, we will be slowed down to 70 again. And when slowing down, again, don't set the AFB to the lower speed, because this will typically result in you getting march to slow, brake or use the gradient to get to the speed, and then set the AFB. Here is the 70 limit. It was above the track here. At the next station I think this is limited to 60. Beautiful, isn't it? And I think that the puzzle about why we have a blue T indicator on the Baureihe 182 is answered, since we have a blue T indicator here. So probably this is just the T, the door indicator for Austria. Nice route, he says. Have you unlocked the mastery reward already? To be honest, I have no idea. We have to check this later. I already played some services, but I didn't check the mastery award. Was this the mastery award that you were talking about the other day? And yeah, it is a nice route, and I think that you can actually see that they paid more attention than usual for scenery issues, and you have less floating cars. No, I overbraked a bit because I was late for the speed limit. But at least I made it. Ah, that was Frankfurt, the air show. And, well, yeah, I definitely have not activated it. If I have unlocked it, I definitely have not activated yet. So we will not see it. And AJ says, I can't believe you. That's like the first thing I would have checked. Whether you unlock the mastery. No, this is not things. No, it does not come up automatically. You have to turn it on, this overlay. And as soon as you unlock a mastery reward like this, it gets eligible in those overlays. But you have to activate it, otherwise it won't appear. So if it annoys you, you can just turn it off again. So this should be a part where we can make up the speed, because this is going downhill for a short while. Also, the tunnel lighting is much better than it used to be on other routes, in my opinion. Before you get to the summit, there is one tunnel with those window type openings on the side, and I think this looks really nice with the lighting. So if I'm not mistaken, the speed limit will increase once more to 70 after a while, before it drops to 60 and then 50 again. Well, does not help us a lot at the moment, because we are having trouble getting our speed back to the 60. Hey, Railjet. What I like in Austrian signaling are those warning signs that announce the main signal. Don't know why we don't have this in Germany. This makes it sometimes more convenient to time your brake applications. Yeah, those what we would call a must shield, right? Those white, red, white indicators that count down to the main signal. The benefit of the Signalnachahmer, I'm not entirely sure. But look at this horizon here. Almost looks like a Bob Ross painting. Here is 70 increase at 88.8. So, where was the 60 limit then? I think it was the one behind the rock wall. There's a rock wall on the right, and then after that, as soon as the track turns to the left. But we will see if I remember that correctly. Obviously be easier to download like Noir's timetable and check with the hectometer signs. Hectometric signs. But I like to have my eyes on the route. So, at least we got the train to 70 again. So hear those ding, ding, ding signal. Oops, yeah. Here it was. And I missed it. And now see, if I use the AFB to slow down the speed, then it will slow down far below. It was actually the limit behind the rocky wall, but instead of reacting to the rock wall, I was mesmerized by the repeater signs or announcement signs. So, and this is what you get if you use the AFB. Well, this is what you get if you miss the speed limit, but this is what you get if you use the AFB to slowing down. You always will drop like 15 kilometers below the target speed. This is why I advocate slowing down the train to the speed that you are targeting to or for, and then set the AFB when running uphill, that is. Downhill it is not so important. Inspector says when I'm driving the 1116 in AFB, after a while a hissing sound comes on, like brake pipes being filled released. If you tip the release brake button, it goes away immediately. Yeah, this is strange. I think this happens especially if you coast. So if you set the throttle to 0, then you get this. I don't know if this is connected somehow with the AFB holding brake. Wouldn't make a lot of sense to apply the AFB holding brake if you're actually coasting your train. But I've seen this too. Let's see if we can reproduce it. Setting the throttle to, where is the brake release here? Throttle to neutral. Yeah, that was it, right? I see. Yeah. But we did not get a brake application. Cylinder pressure stayed at 0. So I'm not sure what this actually is. But it happens every time you neutralize your throttle with AFB on. And you expect the AFB to apply the brakes as a holding brake if you set the throttle to 0 or below a certain threshold, but only obviously if you are at a very low speed and not when you're coasting with 40 or whatever. So maybe this is some bug that plays this hissing sound even though the AFB holding brake is not applied because we are traveling too fast. At least an idea. So we are limited to 60 at the moment. And there will be a limit to 50. At around kilometer 100. Before we get to Gloggnitz or whatever this village is called. Here are those window thingies. Now it is quite dark, so you don't see them a lot, but with daylight on, I think they are very pretty.
Sifa.
Nicest tunnel on the route, or rather nicest gallery. I think it is a full-blown tunnel with some openings like a gallery. The purplish cap, yeah, this is because of the setting sun. This gives us this purplish tint. Wir fahren den Berg hoch, bis die Wolken wieder lila sind. Yeah, throttle to 0 and we have this hissing sound. And AJ requires, or requests, a drive-by. So worth it for this long train, yeah, that's true. Here another drive-by. And another double header. This is the most picturesque part of the route. Well, not in the tunnel here, but between the tunnels, obviously. Careful. Getting closer to the summit means that we might run into signals.
Zugbeeinflussung.
99.2, there will be the limit to 50 soon. In a way, it is said that in future everything will be in a long tunnel except for some rail tours. I guess the rail tours will be there still. But it's okay that they don't have to haul their freight trains across anymore. So let's try to do it without using the brakes, just by setting the throttle slower. And around the corner there should be the 50 limit, if I remember correctly. Yes, kilometer 100 and about 102 there should be the 50 limit. Yeah, you can see it here. Incoming. Here's 102 and behind it the 50 sign. Here. And obviously I started slowing down early, but you don't have this bulb here if you don't set the AFB before you actually slow down the train. It's much faster through the tunnel, yeah. Signal is still clear. Yeah, and most of the cars are actually driving on the road, no, not above it, not in the road, and not next to the road. But I appreciate that they paid attention to things like this. Typically before we get to Semmering proper, we will get an announcement of 40. But so far, we are still clear. We are still clear. And now we are supposed to slow down.
Zugbeeinflussung. Türfreigabe. Türfreigabe. Türfreigabe.
Aiming for something between 20 and 30. To not lose the momentum completely, but also not to get a Zwangsbremsung because of a 500 Hertz magnet that might be there. Yes, and Spectre says he likes the Austrian voice. Yeah, do you remember when Superpole told us who actually... no, that was not for the loco, right? That was for station announcements. Whose voice that was. And Zwangsbremsung with an Austrian accent is much nicer if it is pronounced by a woman. Okay. Here we are. Wait for signal to change. Now we have this sound all the time. Now it stopped. On the IC it has a slight Bavarian accent. It actually, in my opinion, has a Franconian accent on the ICE, at least on the ICE 3. This one male voice at least has a Franconian accent. There is a female voice that has a Bavarian accent. It sounds like a lower Bavarian accent in my opinion. On the ICE, the voice that says Störung, Störung, Zugbeeinflussung, Türen schließen. I think that one has a Franconian accent. Nürnberg or Würzburg area. Yes. I would say more Nürnberg than Würzburg. More middle Franconian than higher Franconian. Or lower Franconian in the case of Würzburg. So, now we're sitting here, twiddling our thumbs. Yeah, I never understand what they say. Lie gesperrt or nie gesperrt. Gesperrt is locked, obviously. But whether it is L-E-N-E, maybe we should try to find that out sometime. In the beginning I never understood why the train says that, because there's obviously no malfunction. On the IC3, yeah, I remember that. I remember playing Schnellfahrstrecke Köln-Aachen at the first time, and I was wondering, where is there malfunction? Why does he say Störung, Störung, LI gesperrt? LI gesperrt. But it is like a self-test, right? So, we are allowed to go again. Release the brakes. Angleichen. And then wait a bit. Actually, you should wait like 2-3 minutes till all the brakes in your train release. And then try getting this train on the road again. Yes, without rolling back. It actually works. Don't release here, even though it is possible, because you will have a new 1000 Hertz at this signal anyway.
Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung. Zugbeeinflussung.
Moon Pulsar, you subscribed. Hello, thank you for the subscription and for your first appearance on the chat. Welcome to my stream. Maybe we want to use the high beams now. Yay, cheers, says AJ. For Moon Pulsar. The whole set followed, subscribed, appeared on the chat. Great, thank you so much for the support. So, this is Semmering station, if I'm not mistaken. I love those lamps. And here is the memorial. "40 and clear," it says, the signal. Wonderful, and now we are driving downhill. And since it is so dark, increase to 65.
Türfreigabe. Türfreigabe.
Yeah. I know we are slow. But now that we are running downhill, we have to always clock the AFB like 5 kilometers below the target speed. Otherwise we are constantly overshooting. That was that. We can go. And did you realize when we are leaving Semmering here, we first get a red on white sign saying 6.5 for the line speed, and then a bit later we're getting a white on black sign saying 6.5, modifying the 40 from the signal. It's a bit like what we talked about in the stream at Leipzig the other day. That route speed, line speed on one hand and signal speed on the other hand can actually differ a bit. Moonpulsar says, "A very small thank you for everything I've learned from you except for your videos I always liked on YouTube." Thank you so much. I appreciate also the likes on YouTube very much. I don't get very many of them, but I'm so happy for everyone telling me that my videos are actually useful, and I enjoy so much the company of everyone who likes and enjoys to look into those things: signaling, safety systems, operating rules, and get a better understanding for what we are doing in the game, except for just driving along what the HUD tells you. So thanks so much again, and I'm so happy that you liked the videos and found them helpful. Spectre says, "Yeah, Tega makes PZB easy. Thanks a lot." Thank you, Spectre. Well, the thing is, the game is so much more fun if you start understanding those things, and at least for me, and I like sharing this and working together with you guys, finding out more and more stuff, discussing it. That's great. Exactly, Moonpulsar says, "It would be impossible for me to learn." Ah. Well, together we learn, and together we enhance our experience. Boing. The difficult part is, Spectre, is finding out whether I screwed up or whether the game is bugged. Yeah, that is true. This is why I always like discussing things like this with you guys. Trying to corroborate what is happening with the rules and comparing it to other sources. And then try to find out whether this is how it is supposed to be or not. And Moonpulsar says, I've never tried this route, looks interesting. And AJ says it's a beautiful route in her opinion. It is really a beautiful route. I enjoy it a lot since I got it. And it is the only route that is completely in Austria, I think. Without any part that licks over to Germany. So now we are just rolling downhill until we get to Mürzzuschlag. Somewhere around here we must have crossed or still be crossing the border between Lower Austria and Styria. Getting into the Steiermark. Don't know if this is at Semmering precisely or somewhere below or after or before. Riding into Austrian sunset. Didn't we start in another country? No. We started in Austria. We started in a different Bundesland, a different state. Niederösterreich to what was it again? Steiermark. But the train actually started in Hungary. That was a different country. And so far you are right, but this is not in the game. The city with the ostrich and the horseshoe. So this is the off-map location that the train started. And even to Villach Süd we are not going. We are stopping in Mürzzuschlag. Villach would also be in Austria, but in another different Bundesland, in Kärnten. Carinthia, I think it is in English. And Moonpulsar says, I usually try to clip my gameplay when I have a penalty break, and 99% of the time it's my fault, but it really helps. Yeah, that is a really great idea. So you clip your gameplay, and then you can show it to people and review it yourself especially. I reviewed so much of my own gameplay where I thought, that's a bug, and then, no, it was my fault. Didn't see that one, didn't see that one. Just went too far. Railjet again. Yeah, I think I will keep this motion blur. At the moment, at any rate, I like it. I turned it off in the very, very first weeks of my experience when I was playing Sandpatch Grade in Transcend World 2, because it made the wheels look so clunky. But I guess it has been improved since then. We're getting a signal. Prepare for 40. That means we must get below 65. And this is the thing that is annoying. Did you see the scoring? We got docked for being too fast. Just because we got the 1000 Hertz monitoring. We were still totally within the brake curve, but nevertheless we got docked. And the AFB, by the way, just adapts to the PZB speeds. I don't know, it's a nice thing to happen, quality of life and everything. But if this is prototypical, I don't know. And this part of the scoring system is especially annoying on the American routes, in my opinion. Where you sometimes get jumped by cab signals that require you to slow down. And then you are running significantly over speed. Just because the signals changed. Inspector says, I don't think it is supposed to be like that. Yeah, I don't think this is supposed to be like this, but this is a thing that is totally not communicated. The changes to the scoring system and the speed, the overspeed system in the game. At least I have never read or heard anything about it. For the longest time, it was only the line speed that was supervised with the scoring system. And now, all of a sudden, it supervises sometimes vehicle maximum speeds, sometimes signal speeds, sometimes speeds that come from safety systems.
Zugbeeinflussung.
That's weird. PZB is not LZB plus AFB, yeah. But still, it works like this on this locomotive. The AFB follows the speed that you need to stay under. Funny enough, it does not use the speed margins that are actually controlled by PZB, but the speeds that you are required to stay under according to the operating rules. So it factors in this 5 kilometers per hour margin of error. Like here, 1000 Hertz under PZBM. System controls you to 70 and the AFB is set to 65.
Türfreigabe. Türfreigabe. Türfreigabe.
So is there still a signal when entering Mürzzuschlag here? Or is it not? I don't think so. Still controlling us to 65. Even if I set the AFB to 110, it stays at 65. Interestingly enough.
Zugbeeinflussung.
Never forget to hit the Wachsamkeitstaste when you're passing
Türfreigabe.
one of those Signalnachahmer. Even if they are not yellow as they are supposed to be, in my opinion. If they have a magnet, they give you a new 1000 Hertz monitoring. Most of the time I forget about the PZB startup programs as moonpools are. Especially the 6-speed sign affects me immediately and I try to speed up until I get hit by the Zwangsbremsung in my face. Yeah, totally. I feel you on that. So here, this Signalnachahmer has a magnet and you can see that we are getting a new 1000 Hertz. It distinguishes and turns on again, and if you don't hit the Wachsamkeitstaste again here, then you will get a Zwangsbremsung on the last meters. A good thing that you can release from the start program. Whereas, well, you have to admit that the starter program is in the situations where you get it in the game because you're taking over the service, you would not get the start program in real life because you're already on your way. But this was a thing with the talent on the Vorarlberg route, when the indicators were so hard to read. And it got me so often just because. So that's it. Here, see? For example, you get a speeding even though your line is way below everything. Also here. We're slowing down for the red signal and we are getting docked for speeding even though there is no limit that can actually be seen anywhere. This speeding here is normal speeding, but this one and that one, those are weird. So, yeah, I don't think this is intentional. Somehow the external camera got caught here in this stairwell. I don't think this is intentional, but maybe it is. Someone thought we should control whether we are reacting to PZB, but we are obviously under the PZB brake curve, otherwise we would have gotten a PZB Zwangsbremsung, right? And same thing with the American systems, we are still below the curve where the access system or the ATC system intervenes, way beyond the intervention speed. We have suppression on and everything, and still we're getting docked for driving significantly over speed limit. And whether it is a bug or not, I cannot tell you. If it is not a bug, then it is just poorly implemented. And it is a bit sad that they don't discuss this anywhere, what they are doing to the speed control system. At any rate, this needs to be looked into. On a different note, I totally recommend buying this route. I am very happy with it. It looks great. And it is fun driving. Especially with the talent. Actually, it's fun running over the hill with it and everything. And yeah, I always favor more diversity in operating rules, signaling systems, safety systems, and I hope you did not find it too boring to look into how Austrian brake setup differs from German brake setup. Had we center buffer couplings like the Americans have, for example, it would not be a thing at all, but as long as we are working with our lateral side buffers, we still have to look into things like this. Okay, lady, drive me out of the station and to Carinthia. I log out at this point, otherwise I won't get points for this service. Probably sometimes this happens that way. And I will call it a day. Thanks guys, again, Spectre, Moon Pulsar, AJ, everybody else. And Moon Pulsar says, I'll buy the route once I learn your Austrian video as well. That is great to hear. Spectre says, thank you for the stream, nice one, see you next time. Guys, take care, have a nice time, and see you probably next week. Bye bye.